Hey there guys, it's Metro, and today we return, continuing the series where we give detailed opinions on multiple Blood Death Knight topics, and one of the most hotly contested and interesting ones as of recently has been the Azerite traits on Azerite gear. Now I already made a video on this, but I'm going to be making an update to it. I've actually delisted the previous one. You can still find a link down below if you really want to check it out. But regardless, there's two real reasons I made that, okay? Number one is because looking back on it, I really don't agree with a lot of what I said. A lot of it is honestly poorly formulated opinions that are based in things that I just wasn't as experienced with as I thought I was. That is because I spent a lot of time on the beta with these topics, and I thought I understood things better than I did, but I really didn't give credit to certain traits. Basically, I was looking at the function or the form more so of the traits and not necessarily the balance of them. And since then, things have been balanced substantially to the point that stuff that I might have said if I made an update to that weeks ago would have also been invalidated. And that's kind of the second reason I'm making this, is because this system... I'm really not having fun with it, man. I'm trying my best, and yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about it. But so before we say anything else, okay, we had some problems with this from a various number of people. Everything I'm saying in this video here is my opinion, okay? Hopefully you understand that. If I say something comes out of my mouth, it's always just my opinion, okay? I'm not a god amongst men. I don't have facts about a video game. I don't think really hardly anybody does. But these are my opinions based on my research, my testing, my education on the topic. And maybe that's flawed. You know, it's probably very likely to be. So I hope that if you continue to watch, you'll understand that what I'm talking about is purely my opinion and my preference, okay? So with that being said, first thing I want to talk about is the fact that in the previous video we actually went through all of the traits in dungeons. This is really the thing that really embarrasses me. We went through all the traits in dungeons, and I was like, oh hey, this piece would be really great. Not exactly, but you know, I was looking at some of the pieces. I was like, oh, the dungeon that has this piece, this would be great. And you know, a lot of that was because I'd spent a lot of time in zeros on the beta, especially getting free Azerite gear. Now, since I made that video, that doesn't exist anymore. You don't get Azerite gear from the weekly cache. You can still get it, but there's only one piece. Previously, there was two, maybe three pieces. Apparently, that was never meant to go live. It was just there for testing. And yeah, that completely changed my opinion on the system, made things a little bit different. So first thing, like I said, before I even go into anything else on this topic, the short answer here is just get the highest item level pieces you can get. And whether or not other people agree with that, I don't know. But just have a look at my 385 helm. It has 1,127 stamina on it and 625 strength. So if you're to believe the people who are theory crafting saying that, you know, item level is the highest, most important thing for regular gear, for example, like gloves that have bad stats on them, you know, whatever, a belt that might have bad stats on them, higher item level means it's an upgrade regardless for Blood DK. I would agree with that. The more stamina and strength you have, regardless of secondaries, the better you're going to be as a Blood Death Knight. So if you believe that for that, I don't know why you wouldn't believe that for the Azerite gear. But you have to understand that when we talk about Azerite gear, there's two different things that you might be considering. One is defense and one is offense. And the Azerite gear actually has a pretty big demarcation between the two. It's clearly set up to be, you know, for all three different specs, and you could actually get great benefit from that. But with that said, it's pretty much impossible to target the traits you want. So if somebody were to come to me and say, what Azerite gear do you recommend? I would say, just don't even worry about it. Get the highest item level you can and then worry about the traits. And I know that's not a great answer, but unfortunately Blizzard's put us in this position where we have effectively no control over 90% of the Azerite gear in the game. We have no way to actually get it. And as you see here, I'm wearing a great piece. This is a piece that I really enjoy. Let's take a look at it actually. I think this has some really great traits on it, and I got it from the Warfront. Like there's no way I could have gotten this if I didn't get it from the Warfront. There's no other possibility in the game, to my knowledge. I don't. Maybe it comes from, you can get it from PvP as well, but regardless, it's no, like there's no replicatable way to get most of these pieces. So for me to, so ideally, this is why I'm bringing this up, because ideally, what I would do is I would go through every single piece in the game and tell you which ones I recommend getting, which combinations of traits I recommend using. But it's just a wash because I can't do that. Blizzard does not allow me to do that. The only gear in the game that I can do that with is raiding. So we are going to go through raid gear quickly. And I'm going to give you my opinions on the traits. And then I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the general situations with the traits, okay? So Blood DK has a piece from Mother, which if you haven't started raiding yet, and, you know, I don't know, it's an extremely easy boss. Let's put it that way. Mother, even on normal and heroic, but mythic as well. It's very, very, very easy. We went in there and killed it in 5 pulls last week. So if you're raiding, this is a great piece. I think this is one of the best pieces in the game, and I'm going to tell you why. Eternal Rune Weapon. This is one of my favorite traits in the game. I love this trait. I'm going to talk a little bit about it in the future, but it is easily one of my favorite traits in the game. But Archive of the Titans, the raid traits themselves, that's Archive of the Titans and Laser Matrix, I think it's called. These are the best traits in the game, okay? They seemingly, without question, are the best traits. You could look at Sims. They check a lot of boxes like we've been talking about here the whole time. Primary stats, you know, that's just a good thing to have. And it gives you a lot of primary stats, too, over time. And seemingly it can stack. But the thing is that really makes this great for raiding only, not for 5-mans, any other content. It enables Reorigination Array, which is basically a buff that exists inside of the raid. So you pretty much have to have one of these raid traits on any of your gear. And again, because it's so difficult to control the gear that you're getting, you know, you might need to wear a lower item level raid piece just to make sure that you have this trait for the raiding situation. So realistically, this is a very good trait. It's probably, you know, we talked about this before. It's probably just objectively better than Dancing Rune Weapon. But in my opinion, again, my opinion, Eternal Rune Weapon is an extremely good trait for Mythic plus 5-mans, okay? Not necessarily for long form content. But I really like Eternal Rune Weapon because it gives you strength when you want it the most. The best time for Blood DK is when a Dancing Rune Weapon is up. And other people might say, well, that's the worst time to have a buff because that's when you're already the strongest. But I feel the complete opposite. Because if I can go really hard, pull a really large pack, and burst as hard as possible with Dancing Rune Weapon up, and the Eternal Rune Weapon trait also giving me, and this is the best thing about this trait, for as long as the duration is extended, that strength is also there. I guess that should be obvious, but you know, the longer you increase the duration of Eternal Rune Weapon, the longer the strength is there too. So this elongates your burst window to such a degree that is really noticeable. And I'm having great success with it in 5-mans. Like I said, I have it on my shoulders, and I'm like, so as you see, 370. This is actually a normal piece. So let's take a look at the mythic piece, which is what we would be targeting. That's 781 strength. If Blizzard ever allows you to target these things, you can get 3 of these. Think about how much strength it is. And yes, I know it's going to be less strength than this over the course of the dungeon, but I don't value, oh, thanks for the follow. I don't value the strength as heavily when I don't have my CDs up, even though it, you know, mathematically it's suggesting that I should. I want to be as strong as humanly possible at the right times in a dungeon, and this is why Eternal Rune Weapon is so valuable to me, okay? But on top of that, it has amazing tier 2 traits. Gut Ripper is not as strong as it used to be, but it's still a very good defense or offensive trait, okay? A trait that purely increases your offense. It does effectively 0 for you defensively. On top of that, it has Azerite Veins, which I think is easily the best defensive trait, and if not, easily the best soloing trait. If you've not used this or you've not seen me use it, this trait is insanely good for any situation where I'm just not getting healing. Right now, one of the biggest problems with Blood Death Knight is, you know, we do have very high burst healing, but it comes in waves. And when you don't have those waves coming in, this trait can carry you. I'm talking about, oh my God. So that being said, I'm looking at this piece as the best piece in the raid, okay? I want to get this helm at all costs, and it's from an extremely easy boss. And this trait here isn't bad, but like I said, it's just, there's just so many traits, and there's no way to control getting them that I can't really go through every single one. On top of that, this also has a pretty good tier 3. Now, again, the theory craft might disagree, but I really like this trait and this trait. They're both okay. They don't heal for a ton. Yes, I'm aware. They're not the mathematically highest in any metric. But I really do like the extra healing, especially for 5-mans. Because as a Blood Death Knight, like I said, you have a lot of burst healing, but it comes in waves at times. And it feels like when you can get this extra heal or this extra absorb from Resounding Protection, this can really, really help you. And I've been using Resounding Protection on one of my pieces. I think it is, yeah, the chest. I have it on my piece. 11k absorb every 30 seconds. You see it up here. And it's been healing for about 5+% of my HPS in dungeons, doing 11s, you know, the normal keys I've been doing on stream. So I think that's pretty good. You know what I mean? I think that's pretty good. So anyway, I didn't want to close that, but anyway, that's the helm. Let's keep going. It's a long discussion about just one piece. Vectis has chest. That's the piece we were just looking at, if I remember correctly. Yes. So here's a great piece, right? This is a great piece. It's got Bones of the Dam. Bones of the Dam, I think, is a really good defensive trait. But defense does not check a lot of boxes for Blood DK, all right? Especially you're overgearing content to some degree. You don't really need defensive-oriented traits. So this is a great piece to use as your one raid trait, okay? Archive of the Titans, I think, is probably the best one. You know, you could check out the Sims, whatever, on Blood Mallet. If you guys aren't aware of that website, check that out, Blood Mallet. Basically, it's going to just sim your DPS. So, you know, maybe you value DPS or something more. But I think this trait is extremely good for both defense and offense. And that's something that we really want to have as a Blood Death Knight. Now, the problem here is the second ring is not very good. This is the piece I'm using. Gut Ripper, again, it's pretty good offense, but I just don't like this trait. Strength in numbers, I don't feel like it's very valuable at all. Taking damage has a chance to increase your maximum health by that. Like, I don't know. Maybe I'm going to try it at some point, but in my opinion, currently, I did not have great success with it when I tested it. All right, and then this trait, I don't feel like helps you very much at all. But this is a really cool inner ring again. So it has a very good defensive option, which is what I'm currently using. And it has the March of the Dam trait, which if you watched the previous video was something I heavily recommended. This gives you a lot of speed, all right? This is the mythic chest, but, you know, 300 plus speed is a lot. This makes you very fast. And yet again, if Blizzard would ever allow us to actually choose the traits that we want based on having a number of pieces of gear, this is a trait I would heavily recommend having a set of 3 of, because at times you could run extremely fast with 3 of these. So regardless, this is a good piece. If you really want to have the Archive of the Titans, I would get the chest from Vectis. But again, there's not a lot of options in the raid. There is another chest. This is from Zool. Let's take a look at this one. Now this one has Laser Matrix instead. So this one actually might be even better, okay? Laser Matrix, I don't know if that's better than Archive of the Titans. Like I said, they're better than every other trait in the game from what I've seen, and you should probably make sure you have one every time you're in the raid one way or the other. Bone Spike Graveyard was buffed substantially recently, but apparently it still sucks. I don't know. Again, I don't have the trait, and I probably never will, so I can't properly test it. But people are saying that it does very little damage, and I don't know. The healing doesn't seem like it would be very high on paper, but in theory, this seems like it would be pretty good for 5-mans. That's just my opinion. Regardless, Ablative Shielding and Azerite Globules. These are good. I really like these two, both for defense and for offense. But Azerite Globules doesn't do as much damage as I hoped it would. And then finally, Gemhide is currently simming, quote-unquote, the best defensive trait. It seems like just without question. I don't know. But yeah, it's a pretty boring trait, but it's up all the time. That's the thing. When you're tanking, you're pretty much always going to be getting hit for 10% of your maximum health. If you're not, you're really overgeared. So this is going to be up 100% of the time. The avoidance is probably why it's so good, to be honest. The armor is small, but it does increase your defense, obviously. But the avoidance is really going to help. And this is the good thing about this trait. The armor, you're going to get more armor as you go, but you're never really going to have avoidance, right? So the more avoidance you can get, the better, you know, the more item level these traits eventually have, the better this piece becomes, the better this Gemhide trait becomes. But even if you don't want it, again, March of the Damned, really, really valuable trait. Let's see what else we have. We have Shoulders from Mithrax. I believe these are the only shoulders, if I remember correctly. And again, Archive of the Titans, but it has Embrace of the Darkfallen. If you watched the previous video, you've been following the stream, you know that on the beta, I had 370 Embrace of the Darkfallen pieces of gear, and it gave me 27% leech after Vampiric Blood. That's for 20 seconds. That is a lot of leech, but we learned recently that the amount of damage we do compared to our health pool is smaller in BFA than it is in Legion. So Leech is theoretically worse than it was in Legion. That doesn't necessarily mean 27% of Leech is a bad thing, but it's not as important as it used to be. Other people would argue that it's the time when you need the Leech the least, because Embrace of the Darkfallen, it modifies Vampiric Blood. So as soon as your biggest CD falls off, you now get another CD, which you might not need. But in Mythic Plus 5-mans, you'll know that there is actually really good ways to use Vampiric Blood, especially if you're trying to save a messy situation, or your healer's not able to heal you, or you just need more healing outright. So to me, this is probably the best DK-specific trait, but we've come to find out that the DK-specific traits are just not as good as the other traits numerically. So regardless, if in theory this trait ever becomes very good and you could choose, I would heavily recommend 3 Embrace of the Darkfallens for any situation where you're actually going to want to control your health pool as much as possible, because this Leech is extremely, extremely potent, and I saw this on the beta to a high degree. Again, we have Azerite Globules, which I've talked about, and Winds of War. This is good, probably mathematically good on paper. Pretty much any of these traits that actually give you any type of defense is probably going to be recommended, but I would heavily recommend checking out Overwhelming Power. This is a very interesting trait, and even though it seems to be bad for tanking because a stack is removed every time you're taking damage, it doesn't remove it as quick as you might think. So, yeah, I mean, it's every 1 second. It says it there, but I really like this. If you like haste, then this is a pretty good trait. So again, this is a really well-rounded piece, and this also has Runic Barrier on it, which I think is one of the most interesting traits, but unfortunately is not as good as probably some other inner rings. But, you know, it's just a flat-out buff to AMS. This is great for necrotic weeks. If you can get your hands on this somehow, like Blizzard changes things, maybe you could get a good set of gear with anti-magic or whatever, Runic Barrier on it. But this is also pretty interesting. I quite like this. Whenever an enemy you harmed dies, you heal for a good amount. And this is really nice. There's a lot of fodder in BFA Mythic Plus dungeons. This is going to be terrible for raid, but I think this is actually really good for 5-mans. You know, healing, that's a good amount of healing. Of course, this is Mythic once again, but this is a good amount of healing, and the speed is not bad. Like, you know, a pack dies, you just healed up a bunch, and now you're running to the next pack. So again, these are good traits. I like them. I think they're valuable, but you're just never really going to be able to control which ones you have outside of the raid. So it's going to be difficult to stack. Now here's Gahun, the hardest boss in the game currently. And it has, you know, I don't know. I feel like this is the worst piece. Heed My Call apparently does well DPS wise, but I don't know. I just don't feel like any of these traits are very good. This Marrow Blood trait I feel like is not, I don't know. I guess maybe it's good for pure defense. But again, I want to impress this upon you guys. I don't like pure defense anything in this game unless you're absolutely struggling to stay alive. I want to find stuff that checks multiple boxes. That means more you know, more offense, more defense, more mobility, more utility, all in one. Even if it's less of one, getting more things at the same time is always going to be good because it means you're more flexible. So basically, I would get the Helm from Mother. Okay, I think this is an incredibly good piece, and I would use Eternal Rune Weapon, Azerite Veins, and Resounding Protection probably. Then I would get the, I guess the chest from Zul. I don't know. The chest from Zul has Gemhide. This one did not, right? Yeah, the chest from Zul has Gemhide, which apparently is the best trait. And then I would take Laser Matrix from it. Not a bad option. It doesn't. It's probably a little bit worse than the other option, but you want to have at least one of these from Raid. And the one from Gahun is not good. Obviously, it's the Helm. I think the other Helm is better. So there's the Shoulders from Mithrax. The only option in terms of shoulders. So if you want shoulders, you got to get them from the raid because there's no other guaranteed way you're going to get them. And you could even take Archive of the Titans on that piece. And then instead on the Zul one, you could take, I don't know, I guess Bone Spike Graveyard. It's probably not very good. So Laser Matrix is just better. So take that instead. Maybe having two is good. I don't know. But regardless, as you can probably tell, my big complaint here is I can't choose which traits I want. Honestly, it would be better if they were completely random because I had such visions of interest for this trait system and I can't stack them. I have no ability to stack them and I probably never will unless they start adding like double to triple the amount of Azerite gear sources in the game. I'm never going to be able to choose what traits I want, and I'm never going to, like, the idea here is that it was like legendaries. Once you had them all, you'll be able to choose which ones you want for certain situations, and if you play well with them, they'll dramatically improve your power. But so here, the final word of advice here is, if that ever does come to pass, I would heavily recommend Eternal Rune Weapon. It's my favorite trait. Whether or not it's the best, this is the one I would recommend, and is my preference. And that is because, again, I'll show it. That is because, again, Eternal Rune Weapon gives you such enormous power when Dancing Rune Weapon is up, and that is the most vital time that the Blood Death Knight could ever function. Dancing Rune Weapon is now only a 2-minute CD, up from a 3-minute CD from last expansion, although obviously we had a lot of ways to reduce it. 2 minutes, every 2 minutes. If you have multiple of these traits in 5-mans, you are going to do a lot of DPS. I'm talking about a ton of DPS, all right? I also use trinkets to help support this. The more we could front load our offense, the more effective we can be. Because even now, especially with some affixes, you can't guarantee 100% uptime on some of these packs. You might have to kite. You might be in a situation where you're struggling towards the end of the pack. So it's better to burst as hard as humanly possible. You won't have any problems with threat. That's a big deal too now. Apparently threat is such a big deal that we need to be worrying about that too. So this is better for threat than otherwise. Even if you get more strength over the course of the dungeon, burst threat is definitely more important than consistent threat in my opinion. But anyway, that's that. So this is actually probably my favorite piece in the game. As you see, Eternal Rune Weapon, Azerite Veins, Gemhide. I think this is the trifecta. I would use this piece above all other shoulders in the game. But again, I don't know. I think maybe you can get this from PvP. But if you manage to get this piece, you should use it. I don't know. But yeah, that's pretty much everything. I can't really say anything else. All I would recommend is if you're having trouble choosing which traits you get, just think critically on the topic. Think which ones work better for you, which ones you prefer, and which ones seem like they would help you play better. Just a little bit of thing. If you're looking at pure DPS, I would heavily recommend going to Bloodmail and other simming sources. They're going to tell you exactly which ones sim. And if you look at that, you'll see that the difference between the best and the worst one is quite small, to be honest, especially with how small the numbers of damage we're doing are currently. It's really not that big of a deal. But, you know, there's ones that just are better defensively and offensively. The people who are really affluential in this topic would say that the non-DK specific traits are just better outright. They give you more stats and more available resources than any of the DK traits, and that is their opinion. I have a slightly different one, but realistically, I think I would agree. One thing, if I could tell you that you might hit the lottery with, there are a couple 5-man pieces that are really good. And if I could actually go to the right page, we could talk about that. I believe the one is from Underrot. This is the one that we talked about all these months ago. Yeah, here we go. Bloodrite. This is a trait that I would very, 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 very much like to see, okay? I think this might be one of the best traits in the game. We'll never really have an opportunity to stack it, but this is a lot of haste. And even though somehow the theory crafting has changed to make haste slightly less valuable than it used to be, having haste in 5-mans is extremely nice. The extra blood boils and the extra death strikes are a godsend, regardless of what else the Sims might say. So I think this is probably the best trait in the video game. And if, you know, it works the way I think it might work, again, I've never owned the trait, so I can't test it myself. If it works the way I think it might work, it's going to be up all the time in 5-mans. And that is a really, really good thing. And on top of that, this is a very good piece. It has Heed My Call, which is good AoE damage. Azerite Globules, which used to be good AoE damage. I don't know if it still is. And it has Azerite Veins, which I am in love with this trait. I'm telling you, I would use this trait every day of my life if I could. And it also has, this is useless, don't ever, this trait I think is, everybody would agree, useless, unless you're maybe soloing. No, while no enemies, so that's terrible. Anyway, March of the Damned. I really like this trait. I think it's just as valuable as anything else in the game, especially for 5-mans. The speed of a Blood Death Knight is something that's always been a crutch for us, and being able to circumvent that in any way possible is really good. So if you somehow manage to get lucky and you get the Great Helm of the Putrid Path as one of like the 20-some pieces that you could possibly get from the Azerite cache, congratulations, you've got my favorite piece in the game. Otherwise, that's all the advice I can offer. If you guys have any questions, let me know. I could talk specifically in the comments. I could tell you my detailed opinions, but again, I'm going to have in the pinned comment the previous video. Most of what I said in that video and also in the pinned comment still kind of holds true. So if you want to hear a more in-depth discussion about the actual traits, how they compare side by side, you can. Just realize I was being very foolish there, and I really kind of don't agree with the approach I took in that video. So I just wanted to make this update. Obviously a pretty long video here, but I had to get this off my chest. The system, it could be so good. It could be so good. I was so happy with it on the beta, but now that it's so restrictive and we just have pretty much no chance to ever choose and stack the traits we might want, I don't know if it's ever going to. And really, the goal of the system to me is to make these traits so strong by the end that stacking them in certain ways will completely change the way your character plays. And this is something that people say all the time, like, oh, the traits are so boring. You're never gonna care about them. They're just passives. Well, I'm telling you, if in the first tier of the raid, this thing is giving me 679 strength when I use it every 2 minutes, or Embrace of the Darkfallen, the first tier of the raid, 3 traits, 370, the first tier of the expansion, I mean, is giving me 27% leech. What the hell is the final raid going to give? You know what I mean? These are not insignificant numbers, and it's going to get to the point where the numbers are so high that you can't ignore them. Even if they're passive, quote unquote, you'd be bad for ignoring them. You'd have to make use of them in certain ways by mixing and matching your gear. And that's when I think about the system, that's what I think of. We are not there yet. We may never be there, but I have great hope for the future. I'm hoping that 8.1 will actually have more Azerite gear that we could talk about as well. But for now, this is the guide, quote unquote, comprised of entirely my opinions about Azerite traits, which ones you should check, especially from the raid, because that's the only place you'll ever guarantee that you'll get gear from. And that's that. So thanks for watching. We'll see you guys in the next one.